Welcome to Season 2 of the Cryptopulse podcast, your ultimate guide to the world of crypto, Bitcoin, and world economics. We're here to guide you through the crypto universe with thought-provoking topics, in-depth knowledge, and information to help you make informed decisions. We'll also be interviewing some of the best minds in the industry, such as CEOs of crypto projects, traders, economists, authors, and development teams from around the globe. And now for the episode.
Hello and welcome back to the Cryptopulse podcast for another one of our epic episodes about crypto and macroeconomics. And this week we have something a little bit different. We're going to be talking about how politics affects the markets, or I think it's something like how the markets affects politics now, Ben, right? I mean, it seems to have turned on its head a little.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, this episode will be going out a little bit late, but for anybody that is in the know and following UK politics, we have had a bit of a whirlwind week. Liz Truss, who was the 56th Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, lasted only 44 days in her role. Her Chancellor, Kwasi, lasted much, much less. And I think now in the UK, we're currently on our fourth Chancellor in 4 months, which is quite a staggering feat. And globally, you know, I think UK politics is being observed as a little bit of a farce. The government are really sort of struggling to come up with any solid policies. And what we're seeing is a really interesting thing that we thought would be useful to talk about, is just how government policies are being steered by the global markets. And this is something that we're seeing not just in the UK, it's something that we're seeing worldwide, but particularly the UK is a good case study for this. And just to kind of add some context, so a couple of weeks, our Chancellor of the Exchequer came out with a brand new mini budget and set out some really ambitious, let's call it ambitious, fiscal policies, and the markets responded in a really aggressive way, and the government have now had to U-turn on all of those things. And yeah, it's quite a fascinating dynamic, because historically governments would be the ones that would have the power to sort of steer the direction of the country. But actually now it's the markets that have got much more power over the governments, because they're having to think about the policies that they're bringing in based on the way that they think the economy is going to behave. So yeah, it's been a very interesting time. And of course, you've been back in the UK now for about a week, haven't you, Kevin? It's a week, 2 weeks?
About 3 weeks, I think.
Oh, okay, 3 weeks.
And yeah, I've just sat here in total disbelief about what's going on, and well, we can come on to kind of my thoughts a little bit later on things, but I think there's one thing deciding that you're going to have a low tax economy. I support in principle a low tax economy. I think that's a good thing. I want people to have more of their money that they can spend in small businesses, and I also support SMEs really, and I think the amount of larger companies that have taken over smaller companies since the pandemic has increased, and you can kind of see we're heading to this world where big corporations really will be providing the bulk of the services, which isn't really true free market capitalism. It's been gerrymandered by not just the UK government, by world governments and billionaires supporting governments and vice versa. So the everyday person gets screwed. I think that the idea of that low tax economy was a good one, but it was so naive of the Chancellor and the former Prime Minister to put that forward when there's a massive hole. And the only way that they could fill that hole is to borrow money. And we're now in this situation where every country's in debt. So there's two ways to get out of that, which is to tax your way out of it or to have economic growth. And I just don't see where this level of economic growth is coming from. We spoke about this a couple of weeks back in the New Era of Wealth episode, where we were talking about the decentralized economy and tech. And I I think the way that economies grew previously through high levels of manufacturing, house building, increase in population, we just don't have the same level of demographics moving forward. So we just get into this situation where we're in this DBT spiral, as Greg Foss calls it. And the more debt you have and the higher the interest rates, the more debt you have. So it's like having a credit card with an unlimited spending limit, and the interest rates are going up all the time. Or you just borrow more money to pay the previous debt. And all the time, the money supply is devalued, the fiat currency is debased, and it's the everyday people that get screwed. You know, trickle down economics doesn't work anymore. And I've been sat here the last few weeks just thinking that I don't know where this is heading, apart from some kind of like big reset, funnily enough.
Great one,
and some,
perhaps.
yeah, the great reset and CBDCs. And all I do is kind of hope and pray that BTC becomes that layer zero ethical top layer money that allows people access to something that isn't going to debase over time, because I don't know of a better solution. And I've been thinking about this quite a lot recently. So don't know what your thoughts are about that.
I mean, if only we had a crystal ball. I feel the same as you. I think we are heading towards a fundamental shift in how the economy works for the average person. I don't think that this fiat system is sustainable. And we've spoken about this on the show, but historically, fiat monetary systems typically have a shelf life of about 100 years. And you only have to go back sort of the last 1,000 years to see how money has debased over time, and whole civilizations have collapsed in line with their currencies. I don't think that that's going to happen this time, but I do think that there is a slow move that's starting to happen. As you rightly said, inflation is completely out of control at the moment. I think the UK's came in at 10.1%, and that's just the consumer price index. And of course, that doesn't include things like foods and other volatile items, which arguably are up 500% in the last 10 years. So, you know, I think
that compounds, right? That 10% compounds over time. And that's what people don't realize. You know, we're taught about compound interest calculators. And yeah, if you got 7% interest on your savings over 50 years, this is how, and you'd be a millionaire. Well, you know, if you inflate your savings away and your wealth away 10% over 10 years, what's going to happen?
Yeah, it's scary because there are no checks and balances in place to make sure that the average person wage increases in line with inflation. I do know that very recently the national living wage has been upped. I think it's now something like £13 an hour, and that's meant to match inflation. But there are still discussions going on at the government level about whether the benefit system, or whether in fact the pensions need to rise in line with inflation. And my argument is, of course they have to. You know, they've got to. Because you know, if we're not at least increasing wages and benefits and pensions in line with inflation, in fact, what's happening is people are getting a real value cut from their income. You know, I don't think that the average person has fully felt the effects of the way that the economy shifted in the last 12 months. You know, we're now going into this high interest period. You know, the Bank of England is going to have to aggressively raise interest rates to start bringing that inflation down. And that's going to impact people's mortgages. People that aren't on fixed rate packages are going to be paying, you know, hundreds of pounds extra on their mortgages. And I think when you couple that with the rise in energy bills and the rising cost of goods and services, you know, people are really going to start feeling the pinch. And, you know, we talk about a recession, and I think that that's absolutely guaranteed now. You know, I think we're definitely entering into a period of economic slowdown. But I mean, all of this points to actually a period of depression. You know, I just don't see how we're going to grow our way out of this. At the moment, you know, our debt to GDP ratio is completely skewed. So it's going to be fascinating to see how they turn this around. My gut tells me that there's still more to come from the conversation around CBDCs. I see lots of countries really making headway with that. And whilst nobody's sort of implemented a really meaningful solution, I think think it's coming. In what form is the big question, and whether they go down the route of having programmable money that you have to spend in certain areas within the economy, I don't know, but it's still a major question mark. But I think, as Greg Fossel says, risk happens fast, and I think we're starting to see the house of cards collapse.
So I think any leader of any country at the minute is kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place. So you have to play the game of the current financial system in order to protect the immediate term. So if you said, right, yeah, we're like, screw this, we're going to do something completely different, like in El Salvador. I mean, that just wouldn't happen in the UK or any developed Western country. So the only thing that you can do is to raise interest rates, raise taxes, and then when that becomes too much, you then have to print more money and reduce interest rates, and then go through the whole cycle again. And that's the only way you can really make that sort of sustain the fiat Ponzi, really. And if you start to pull away from that, I think you see some of the things like we've seen recently in the UK, where the market takes a dip, and then the rest of the world looks upon us as a country as potential risk. And so I don't know a smart way out of this. All I can say is that we have to take some kind of action as individuals, and I think the only way that we can do that is to look at things like Bitcoin as a hedge against what's going on. I literally don't know any other way of dealing with this. You could get a property, but then you probably need a mortgage on that, and you're going to be paying higher interest rates. You could buy gold, but gold has performed really poorly over the last decade. And of course, it's not that portable or divisible, or it's not really that liquid if you hold the physical asset. So it's a real conundrum. And I've sort of been completely orange pilled the last couple of weeks, because I can only see one way out of this. And I think it gets worse before it gets better. But like you said to me a couple of weeks ago, spring always comes, and I'm hopeful that Bitcoin provides a life raft for the global monetary system, and that we can get back to some kind of like ethical truth when it comes to a monetary system. Because until we see some kind of decentralization of power from economics and politics, I don't know how things can get better, because we're just going to be going down this path where governments, everything that they seem to do is either inflationary or inflammatory. And it's such a shame, because really a good government is there to serve the people and to provide critical services for that nation, and to work on behalf of the hard-working people that pay taxes in this country. And that's just not happening.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And it's sad to see, because it is the average Joe, you know, it is your taxi drivers, it is your shopkeepers, it's your, you know, it's the sort of public service sector that are kind of keeping things moving. You know, they're the ones that are generating the majority of the wealth in the economy. And we've had some disagreements on tax generally, but I think, you know, it's a healthy conversation to have. My personal feeling is that I think taxation is actually a good thing, providing it is in the hands of a government that are spending it responsibly. You know, I think as a society, for us to function at our best, we need good solid infrastructure, we need good roads, we need good schools, we need good hospitals. Sadly, I think what we've seen over the last sort of 12 years with our Conservative government is that they're very happy to squander public money on, you know, private deals, and it's to the tune of billions and billions of pounds. You know, and if that money had been put into the NHS or put into schools, arguably you could say that is a good use of public money. And I'm not saying we need to be in a high tax system. You know, we're not talking like Denmark. I think sort of like, you know, standard tax is 40% for every citizen. I actually think where we're at now is probably fair. But I certainly don't think, and the wealthy friends that I have that I talk to about, the tax cuts that have been proposed by Kwasi, the last chancellor, people are saying we don't need these tax cuts. If I've got another 20 grand in my pocket at the end of the year because of a tax saving, that doesn't really improve my quality of life. That's just going to get put into some sort of investment device, and it's just going to sit there, and it's not going to add any more sort of value to the economy. So I think it is a balancing act, but as you rightly said, it does require that you've got a good, responsible government in place, and money corrupts, and I think the longer that these people are in power, the more risk they're willing to take with public money, and I think that's kind of where we're at. So it's interesting to watch this play out. I mean, the Conservative government, just to sort of get back to the topic of the show, is that they are now falling apart at the seams. They don't have a leader in place. The party are incredibly divided, and they're really now trying to come together around a single candidate for leader that really understands how to steer the UK through this economic crisis. Because for the last 44 days, they've really been using the UK as a laboratory. These are economic experiments that they've been running, and whilst they're ideological, they don't necessarily work in the real world. And what we've seen is that the markets have responded, the pound has tanked, and we've also seen the Bank of England stepping in with a package of quantitative easing to buy up gilts from pension funds, because pension funds were about to collapse. They were being margin called on one of the only products in their pension funds that were meant to sort of steady the ship, and that's just a disaster of just mammoth proportions. We've never seen anything like that before, where a government's policy has been so damaging that pension funds, private pension funds, are being margin called. I think they sort of, Liz Truss sat in number 10, and her argument was, well, this is what the Bank of England is for. They're here to steady the economy. And I think arguably that isn't really what they're designed to be. I think it is up to the government to come up with responsible policies that work for everybody. But I'm hoping that whoever comes in next actually understands what's required of the economy and understands how the markets will react to anything that's announced, because this isn't just a UK problem. Inflation is a global thing. If you look at the sort of inflation map for Europe, it's running hot everywhere, and I'm not sure how we get out of it, honestly.
Yeah, that remains to be seen, doesn't it? I mean, on your point, going back to your funding public services, I think that's important. It's like how you do that, and how that spending is tracked and how those services are managed. My issue with almost every government organisation is they're run typically very, very efficiently. Inefficiently, really. That wasn't a Freudian slip. They've run very inefficiently, and they cost an absolute fortune. They spend money on things that aren't really the primary objective of that department. I'm not going to call out any particular government departments, but there's one that you and I are waiting on via another project we're working on. Yeah. And I look at what they're spending money on, and I think it's just so unethical, because every single pound should actually be spent on the primary objective of delivering that service, not all the peripheral nonsense that it's spent on. And that's where I have issues with government departments in general. So I'm hoping that things like DAOs in the future and technology can replace a lot of the bloat that's there. And I know I'm going to get shot at because I'm advocating for less employment, but what I am advocating for is less employment in government departments that isn't necessary and is taking away funds that can go into things like children's education, building schools, building roads, the primary services that we need that have been depleted so badly. And I've just lost faith in the system. I've lost faith
agree.
in what's happening, and that's why I'm going to be doing what I'm doing in the future, is because I don't actually believe this system works. And I think when you have the fiat Ponzi, which is kind of like your base layer of money, everything else that you do on top of that, whether it's quantitative easing, whether it's interest rates, whether it's taxes, it's kind of like, until you fix the money problem, all of these other problems are still there.
I totally agree.
So it's like we're looking at the symptoms, not the cause.
Yeah.
And no one in government can say that. So that makes me think, like, what do we do? Like, what do we do as individuals? Because you could run for a parliamentary position, you could be a councillor, you could be a person of influence, you could be a media personality and talk about this stuff. But what do we do as individuals, like Ben, Kevin, anyone else that's listening to this show? What action do we take? Because one thing that I've learned in all the years that I've been alive and been an adult is that if you rely on a government to solve your problems, you are absolutely screwed.
Yeah, it's a difficult time. And for investors, that even sophisticated investors, I mean, for you to outpace the rate of inflation is no mean feat. We've got, as I said, the CPI came in at 10.1%. I mean, for you to generate 10.1% on your sort of investment portfolio at scale is pretty challenging. It's not an easy thing to do. So, I
Nancy
think
Pelosi managed to do it, I think.
She does. I mean, she's phenomenal. I've always said she's in the wrong job. She should be managing a hedge fund, although I get the sense that maybe she wouldn't have the information if she wasn't working in the Senate. But,
No.
I think that, I'm not accusing Nancy of anything at all, by the way. But you look at the US, and it's a gerontocracy, isn't it? The average age of the people in power is sort of 60, 70 plus. And so this problem about sort of raising the debt ceiling and inflation is just not a problem they care about. This is something for the generations to come to deal with. They're all going to be dead by the time this fiat system collapses. But I really believe that we are in late stage capitalism. All of the indicators are there. People are now having to get second jobs. In America, there is now this pandemic of people having to get 3 jobs, and also things like buy now, pay later on food delivery services. I mean, these are just absolutely bonkers things that shouldn't be happening in a society like this. Deliveroo last week, they launched this sort of buy now and pay in 3 lumps thing. And it's like, that is an indicator that the economy is not going well. If people are having to raise debt to buy food, it's a worrying thing. But look, I think it's not all doom and gloom. And, I'm cautious that when we talk about this stuff, it sounds horrible, and it is, but there are things that you can do. And obviously, for me, Bitcoin is one of those things. It's incorruptible. It's a fixed supply, 21 million units. There will never be any more. It can't be controlled by the governments. And, it's the best performing asset of the last decade. So I feel like when you're looking for a life raft on a sinking ship, it's the only one. Gold isn't a bad choice, but as you said, it's not performed that well. It might be useful to have some physical gold in your portfolio, just in case of Armageddon and all of the internet goes down, and we're having to buy things with gold coins. But I think whatever this shift is, it needs to work for the average person. And I think, like they did in 1905,
Absolutely.
I think when they separated religion and government, I think actually money and government needs to be separated at some point. And
I agree. I agree.
That comes.
And we have the power to do that. People do drive change, and I think that's the way that we do it. We all need to make a decision around that, and then we need to hold those accountable, because narratives start to change decisions, and if that becomes a popular thing, then great. I honestly think if most of the population understood how the monetary system works, there would be a huge revolt. There would be absolute anarchy, and I don't want that. Like, I want a peaceful way out of this, and I think the most peaceful way out of this, in my opinion, and whether you decide to do this or not yourself, is to hedge against the current system. And the best hedge for me is BTC, and that for me is the answer. I don't know of a better solution. Like, someone tell me about a solution, because like I certainly don't have one.
And I think that's a really great place to leave the show for this week. And actually, just a quote that I read very recently is that Bitcoin is a peaceful protest. And I can't remember who wrote it, but I thought it was a lovely phrase.
I like that, and I'm hopeful for the future. I've just lost faith in what's going on at the moment, and I think, you know, if you've read the book The Fourth Turning, you kind of will get a picture of what's happening and where we're going. And it is a bit of a rant today, but we like to just share our perspective on what's happening, and I'm very much looking forward to the next bull market, I can tell you that.
Yes, yeah, me too, and maybe we'll talk about that on the next show, because, you know, we've been in full bear mode for a while, but I mean, the good news is, as we say, spring always comes, and I do think that the bear market is getting close to finishing, but that we'll leave that for next week.
Okay, super, great to chat again, Ben, and we'll speak soon.
We hope you enjoyed this episode. It would mean the world to us if you could leave a review wherever you're listening. This really does help and allows other people to find us online. You can keep up to date with new releases of the podcast by subscribing and following us on Twitter or Instagram for the latest crypto-related news. Information provided by Cryptopulse via this podcast, website, social media channels, and any other medium does not constitute financial advice, investment recommendations, or any other type of advice whatsoever. The Cryptopulse team are not professional financial advisors. Trading and purchasing cryptocurrencies do carry risks, and anybody wishing to partake in such activities should seek professional advice.